Welcome to the Inside B2B Influence show, where we talk to B2B marketing insiders about what's working and what's not inside the world of influencer marketing. I'm your host, Lee Odden, CEO and co-founder of TopRank Marketing. And today, kicking off this season of Inside B2B Influence, we're talking with my longtime friend, tiny house owner, King Charles Cocker Spaniel lover and marketer, beloved by millions, Ann Handley. I would be remiss not to also mention that she's a top keynote speaker in demand all over the world, virtually as well. She's a multi-book best-selling author and chief content officer at MarketingProfs. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much for having me, Lee. It's so nice to see your face.
It's great to see you too, and your color-coordinated background. I am so background jealous of you right now.
You know,
I have background envy.
About you were talking about my rainbow bookshelf.
Of course.
About rainbow bookshelves. You know, they're very contentious, not only in the world of marketing, but you know, throughout the land, basically. And what I've learned, it's what it comes down to. Like, you think the world is separated into, I don't know, liberals and conservatives. Like, no. There are people who love rainbow bookshelves, and there are people who are wrong. So that's what it is. But
well,
yeah,
there you go. Well, speaking of books,
it's a very divisive issue, I gotta say.
Who knew we would kick things off with drama? So speaking of books, you of course wrote one of the books you wrote was the best-selling Everybody Writes. Do you think that everybody has influence?
That's such an interesting question, because at first pass it's like, well, of course, but then on the other hand, do they? Like, it's kind of an existential question, isn't it? I really had to think about that for a second. I mean, yes, I do think that everybody has influence, but not everybody has credibility, right? And so I guess in all topics. So yes, we all have influence, but not in all topics. Like, for example, I don't know. I mean, I really like sushi, but that doesn't mean that I'm a fish influencer. Is that a thing? Fish influencer. So, I think we all have our spheres of expertise, and we are influential within those spheres of expertise. But I don't think that we are influencers across all things. I also think that, especially in B2B, that the notion of influencers is even more narrowly defined than it is in B2C, because because the expertise that I have in marketing is, yes, it's B2B, it's content, it's writing, it's very specific. I don't think you would come to me if you were looking for somebody to talk about, analytics, like you would go to Chris Penn. He's an influencer in marketing analytics. And so I think, especially in B2B, that is absolutely true. That credibility that I have as an influencer is very specific and narrow. And I think that's true of any B2B influencer.
Yeah, it's not a 1 or a 0. It's not a light switch. And that's the mistake a lot of folks seem to make, is the presence of influence does not extend to all things about that person, maybe in a superficial way, but more sophisticated marketers are digging deeper, like you just described, and understanding what specifically that person has influence and credibility about, and then working with them on those things, right? Speaking of everybody, I was going to say, is everything influential? Of course, I'm thinking of Augie, the Insta dogfluencer, your Insta dog influencer. He's certainly become influential to me. I can tell you that, for whatever that's worth. So feel free to start pitching dog products, because I'm going to buy them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you're talking about my dog, littlest August. It's funny because August is he's my 10-month-old Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. He's the most recent dog that I've had, but I've had dogs my entire life. And in my adult life, I've had, I don't know, maybe 6 or so. Many at one time. It's not like I keep killing them off sequentially. Terrible. But he's the only one that I've established a separate social presence for. And so it's been kind of fun to sort of see, what does it take to be a dogfluencer, a dog influencer in 2021. It's actually been eye-opening in a lot of ways. I know we're not here to talk about what's it like to build a dog presence on Instagram, but it's different than I expected it would be. So anyway.
Well, there are lessons to be learned starting from scratch
Yeah.
at any given point in time on what it takes. And that's something I think that gives you a lot of empathy for the practice for sure, whether it's consumer or pet.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And actually, I mean, I know I'm sort of like derailing this entire conversation. We have like B2B influencer and let's go. But the funny thing about that, like, yes, I think that's like being in an always be learning mindset. And that's in part why I started his Instagram account. It's not like I needed something else to do. But to your point, like, you know, being an amateur in everything that we do as marketers, I think it's so important to maintain that perspective, that point of view. So that's in part why I did it as well, because, you know, just to sort of see what it's like, you know, what's it like to start an Instagram account from zero, and how do I have credibility, to bring it back to B2B? How do I have credibility as a marketer speaking to a marketing audience if I don't actually know, like if I'm not getting my hands dirty? And the further you go along in your career, of course, the less you do get your hands dirty, the less you touch things. And so I think it becomes even more imperative that, you know, that you seek out these opportunities. So yes, in this case, it's about, you know, building a dog's Instagram presence, but you learn a lot about what's it actually like to work with the algorithm and to build those relationships, or his relationships with other Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, all of that stuff. I mean, yes, it's applied in a very narrow area, but it applies across the board as well.
Well, you know, speaking of getting your hands dirty, of course, something that got everyone's hands digitally dirty, of course, was the pandemic. And in the B2B world, the acceleration of digital transformation, actually of all companies, not just B2B companies, because B2B has become decidedly digital first, right? There's, you know, the outside sales and field marketing stuff is, you know, been put aside for a moment. And a lot of companies have found that those new go-to-market models are working as good or better than what they were doing before. So this has impacted, you know, all areas of business, including marketing. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what impact has, you know, this emphasis on digital first in B2B marketing had on the demand to work with influencers? Because you're an influencer. So what impact has it had on people reaching out to you to work with you?
Yeah, yeah, I have definitely seen more of those opportunities, you know, come my way, because I think, just to your point, you know, yes, all of the traditional B2B tactics of, you know, field marketing and in-person trade shows and other moments to, you know, sort of experience a brand, you know, face to face, all of that went away in the past 15 months or so since the pandemic, right? And so what takes its place, you know, that's been what's fueling, I think, a lot of that digital transformation at B2B companies. And so influencer marketing is very much part of that, because I think, how do you build that sort of trust with your audience if you don't have the ability to meet them in person, to sit down, to have a conversation with them? And so I think influencers have become a proxy and a conduit for that. And what's interesting, I see from like straight up from an influencer standpoint too, is that more of those companies seek to have those relationships with me. Like, they're seeking to build those relationships with me in much less of a transactional way. Like, I think aspirationally, you know, a year or two ago, you know, I know you and I have talked about this, Lee, but I remember saying to you, you know, well, that this is like the future of B2B influencer marketing, is that we're going to see more companies start to embrace the opportunity to form relationships with influencers versus, you know, straight up transactional, you know, making it less of an advertising / transactional play. Like, here, I'll pay you X amount of dollars if you share my thing, you know, like that's more of a B2C model. But I think in B2B, what we're seeing is, and this has been fueled by the pandemic, is that, you know, we are seeing those relationships start to happen between brands and influencers like me, where they're reaching out to me proactively and saying, hey, like, we don't have a thing right now, but we want to work with you. You know, can we sort of get to know each other? And so I think we're seeing an increasing, you know, impetus toward that, an approach that I feel is a whole lot more, like, it has more sustainability long term, and it's the way that I like to work personally. So yeah, I think we're seeing a whole lot more of that.
Well, certainly, you know, if you can, you know, you talk about shared values and relationships and authenticity, and bottom line, someone can be influential. They still care about stuff, not just about getting paid, and they care about how they get paid. And of course, the nature of their influence is really based upon their character, their integrity, and who they are and what they believe in. So the
Yeah.
relationship emphasis is really a way, not only I mean, everyone feels better about it because it is more genuine, and it's something that is probably going to be tied more directly towards the goals that mutual parties involved are trying to achieve. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
opposed to, hey, just give us a quote.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I think there is this notion that still exists in B2B marketing that somehow B2B is more, sort of buttoned up and less personable, and that, it's a little bit more hands off. But I actually think that that's not true, that the
Right.
opposite is true, that, there's this notion that, oh, B2C is a whole lot more personal and that it's more about our values. But actually, I think B2B there's so much more at risk. Like, think about, what's at risk when you make a recommendation. Like, if I were to recommend something to my audience as an influencer, my reputation is at risk, my brand is potentially at risk. If something goes wrong, my livelihood, like, there's a whole lot more at stake versus me saying, here, try this stick of gum, it's fantastic. Like, I may look like a little bit of a shill, but less is on the line. So I think that what does that mean? It means that, trust is absolutely number one. Like, it has to be a brand that I trust and that I know and like, and that people are, that I can wholeheartedly recommend. So there actually is more at stake, I think, in a B2B relationship from a personal standpoint than with B2C quite often.
It's probably a big key to a lot of your success in your consistency in that belief. You're a very trustworthy person as a result of that. You know what I mean? People can count on that. When you talk about things, when you advocate for things, there's a genuineness to that.
Yeah.
And that's not a commodity. I mean, there's trust issues in the business world at large. So there are those beacons of trustworthiness that are more important than ever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's driving a lot of collaboration. I've noticed too a lot more demand. And obviously, I'm in the business of connecting brands with influencers, but definitely seeing an increase in interest in that. And I know you do these sorts of collaborations, or you work with different companies, and I'm wondering if there are any types of collaborations that you're seeing more of. Like maybe in the past it was speak at our event, or maybe it was give a commentary for a white paper or report or something like that, interview or something. Are you seeing any training collaboration, content collaboration types of scenarios that are growing?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I want to caveat this by saying that, I'm speaking from my personal experience versus, I haven't necessarily, polled B2B marketers. And so you probably have a better perspective on this too, whether what I'm talking about is actually reflected in the broader B2B community as well. But yeah, what I see is more brands looking to have a long-term relationship. So not just come speak at our webinar, but can we actually think about this over like a fiscal year? What can we do together in Q1 and Q2 and Q3, so that it becomes much more of a not quite ambassador, but at least more of a brand alignment, right? So that I'm saying I believe in what you do, and you're saying that you trust me as well. And so I think longer term engagement, right, with a trust foundation to it,
Mhm.
is definitely something that I'm seeing. And I'm also seeing like these situations where even if it is, provide a quote for this, or, like, for example, I'll put something in my newsletter that's, sort of sponsored, for example. But for me, it's not anything that you can buy, right? It's something that, I read the paper, I believe in it, I have a relationship with the company. And so therefore, I will share it with my audience. So yes, it's sponsored, but it's sponsored with, with my whole self, I guess. Sounds a little bit goofy, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah.
With integrity, I should say. And so, that is a situation where even like, it'll be over the course of, say, several months. So it's not just like a one and done, but can you help us promote this, and here's what's in it for you, and here's what we want to give to you and your audience, that kind of thing. And so yeah, I guess to sum up, much more long-term engagements, less transactional, which I
Yeah.
think is honestly the foundation of a successful B2B influencer marketing program anyway. but
Yeah.
you probably have more perspective on that than I do.
Well, I have data in our research that we did, the very first research study into B2B influencer marketing specifically that you contributed to.
Yeah.
There's a name for this relationship-based approach, and it's called always on influencer marketing. And we found that companies that or marketers that were implementing always on influencer programs, there are 12 times more marketers that characterize their programs as very successful than people who only did periodic campaigns. And that's a pretty big jump, and there are other stats related to that, but it is kind of interesting because the investment that's being made by everyone involved means that there's motivation to make things successful, and when you have greater understanding, when you have better alignment, when you're looking long term, you can look at, when you think long term, you're going to get long term results, right? And it's today is such a fragmented world that's, content is micro sliced into such small pieces, and we're so distracted and all those sorts of things. It is interesting that in that world of information discovery and consumption that is so small content format oriented, that really it is the longer term sorts of relationships that are bearing more fruit for everyone involved, including the audience in the B2B world.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Yeah, and I was just thinking about something else just as you were talking, and I think that part of why we're seeing that sort of longer term play is actually because of the pandemic as well, and not just because of market forces. So, for example, field marketing going away, in-person events going away, all of that stuff. I think while that's all true, I also think that, companies have had to be a lot more agile, right? In how they are, responding to things like a pandemic. They've had to rethink, how they're showing up for their audience, for the people that they seek to attract. And I think what's happened as well is that we've seen a lot more like executives get on camera. We've seen a whole lot more the willingness, I think, of companies to sort of show their faces. And I think that has cascaded, internally, but also externally with influencers and aligning your message with people who you can trust and build relationships with long term.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the largest growth areas in our business last year was in the realm of executive influence and helping some pretty major brand executives facilitate their social presence, but also their own internal influence, or I should say their influence externally, by partnering them with external influencers and creating content collaborations where, these industry experts are partnered with brand key opinion leaders or subject matter experts, and having conversations and talking about things that matter. And one of the interesting things about that, other than the content was amazing and great, is that it's facilitated genuine relationships between people that didn't really know each other before, because they can relate to each other at a level where, a lot of folks at a very accomplished level can get siloed a little bit in terms of being able to connect with people. And so it's really interesting what's happened, not just in terms of the content creation and the thought leadership and the influence that's been spawned mutually through that type of partnership between executives and external influencers, but also the relationships that are being facilitated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think, and it makes total sense, right? Because I think in the past 15 months of the pandemic, and here we're talking in June of 2021, and it seems like things are improving in most parts of the world anyway, and in most parts of the US. But I think that the brands who have really demonstrated that, not just sort of with lip service that we're all in this together, but have actually had to show up in a real human, genuine way, and to be there for their audiences. I mean, I think that's in part what's driving that kind of collaboration that you're talking about. Because I do think that brands have realized that, to trust somebody, you've got to know them. And how can you trust a B2B brand unless you sort of see the faces of the people behind the brand? I think that cascades throughout B2B marketing, but influencer marketing, I think is one area, just based on what you were just sharing. I think that's clearly one area where we are seeing, that come to life.
With best practices, there are also bad practices. I'm curious if there are any bad behaviors in terms of how people reach out or connect with you or engage with you. So in other words, what's the opposite of inspire? What demotivates you when in terms
Yeah,
of pitching
demotivate.
to you or
Avoid.
getting you
What
to share stuff?
completely destroys me. Um, yeah, I mean, I
My,
think
my,
it, go ahead.
my assumption is that the opposite will be the best practice.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, I mean, there have been, very, I don't know, honestly, like I think there's been a few situations where I tend not to engage basically. And that's a situation where, um, a big agency will reach out and it's clear that I'm one of many, like I'm like part of a stable of influencers that they're looking to, and they asked me to respond to, to fill out this Google form with the size of my audience. I mean, I'm not going to do any of that. Like that's not what I want, and that's not who I am, and that's not what my
Right.
brand is all about. And
Good for
so
you.
yeah, and that's just not what I'm going to do. So and it doesn't matter to me, well, how much money is on the table, because as we were just talking about, the damage to my brand and reputation, it's like, and my credibility is far outweighs anything else. And so that's a situation where I wouldn't engage. And so I can't even say that it's a bad practice, that it's
Mm.
demotivating, because when it comes in, I mean, we just Jess, my assistant, or I would just sort of delete it immediately.
Yeah.
Or they come at it from a tactic standpoint. I get this a lot. For example, my email newsletter, I've talked a lot about it the past couple of years. It's grown pretty significantly, and it has really healthy open rates. The list is just over 50,000 now. So it's a good, robust list. I get a lot of people who say, will you share this in your newsletter? And I don't know them. I don't have a relationship with you. And so if the onus is on me to do the legwork and figure out who you are, what your solution is all about, or what your piece of content is all about, then I'm not going to do it, So, and also that newsletter is not, that's not the role of it. And so if you know me and if you're on the list, then you know that, right? So, if you want to get something in my newsletter, then that's not the first step. The first step is engage with me on social, get to know me, all the things that, to start a relationship, all the best practices around that, not will you share this in your newsletter? And so that's all the stuff that just ends up in the
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of your newsletter, how can I, no, just kidding. What advice would you,
No, here's actually the thing though, just sorry, I was just going to, so like, for example, the B2B research study that you did last fall, right? I think I probably offered to put it in the newsletter, or I probably just put it in the newsletter. And so in the why I did that is because you and I have a relationship, right? And so if it's an act of generosity on my part, that's one thing. But if you were to ask me, and actually, honestly, if you were to ask me, it'd be different because we have a relationship, but let's pretend for a second that we don't have this relationship, right? So if you were to ask me, it just changes the dynamic. And so, I think there's a bigger lesson in there for a lot of agencies or companies who want to work with influencers, right? It's like the relationship that you have with the influencer should make them feel valued, number one. But secondly, I do think that there's an act of generosity on both sides. And that's sort of a foundational aspect, I think, to any thriving B2B influencer strategy. Both people have to feel like they're giving and getting at the same time.
that is priceless advice, often overlooked. And I really appreciate you mentioning that. I was going to ask about the connection between, or an intersection between, influencers and newsletters. Like, so, can you imagine a scenario where someone else who has a newsletter, how they might incorporate influencers in it? I mean, because if they're thinking, oh, we've got people in blog posts and events and but newsletters, that's not really something I've heard too much from other folks before. So I'm curious, as someone who publishes a very popular newsletter, one of the few that I read and subscribe to.
Thank you.
Yeah, like three. There's three: Chris, Penn, Carla, and you. That's it.
Oh, that's awesome. CCNA. How do you, so what's the question, just so I understand?
So like, if you were giving advice to someone who has a newsletter and also is interested in working with influencers, how they might work with influencers and their newsletter, like what are some ways you can imagine someone incorporating influencer content in a newsletter? Would it be just like any other content, or is there anything special? Have you ever contributed as an influencer to someone else's newsletter? That sort of thing.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I mean, certainly, thinking about the opportunity with newsletters is vast. I'm all in on email newsletters, as you know. I think the difference between an email newsletter as a vehicle for influencer marketing and anything else like a social post or something like that is that in an email newsletter, like when you get an email newsletter from Carla or from Chris or from me, you're seeing me, you're seeing Carla, you're seeing Chris, like you're seeing our personalities, versus if you were to interact with any of our content on LinkedIn or on Twitter, you're interacting with LinkedIn, or Twitter, you're interacting with the platform. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think the difference is so automatically, in other words, it's more inherently personal relationship that you have with the person publishing the email newsletter. And so the question on the brand side of things, like if you're a marketer and you're publishing your own newsletter and you want to work with influencers, trying to figure out a way to highlight them in that environment. It could be something simple like just highlighting some of their content or highlighting them as an individual, or it could be something more like maybe inviting them to be like a guest editor or something like that, depending on the relationship.
Sure.
So I think there's lots of opportunity there to influence the influencer as part of your brand,
Right.
in other words, and not just have it as not just thinking that your relationship with the influencer is only in like the social space or only in like in certain spaces. Because I think the email newsletter is just it's such a rich opportunity, I think, to communicate directly with your audience, and the way that to the degree you can. To the degree to which you can invite influencers into that relationship, it only is going to solidify your relationship with the influencer as well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if someone's thinking holistically and they do understand how their audience, discovers and consumes information, if they want to add credibility, third-party credibility to their message, then there may be an opportunity to include external voices in any content channel where they publish.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, it's got to be specific to the nature of the channel, right? You don't do the same thing on Instagram as you would on LinkedIn, as an example, or on a newsletter as you would in a blog necessarily.
Right. I'm sort of interested by the idea of like having a guest editor of a brand newsletter. Like that to me is a pretty interesting idea. I haven't seen it done in B2B, but I think it could be potentially really effective. I'm just trying to think of like who would be a good candidate for something like that. I don't know, I'll think about it, but I think there's value in that. So rather than just have somebody else post at your site, for example, or vice versa, really inviting them as a sort of editorial voice, because really what you want there is it only solidifies that relationship and that trust, I think. So it's an interesting idea to think about having like a guest editor of a newsletter.
Okay. Great advice.
Yeah, think about that.
So one of our goals on the Inside B2B Influence show is, of course, to help do our part to elevate the practice of influencer marketing in the B2B world. What do you wish more marketers would do or stop doing to make the practice more effective?
To not think about your influencer program as a massive program, right? To not have a relationship with 50 influencers, think about maybe 5. I think that most brands fall down on scope. They think that they need access to so many different influencers. 25 or 50 is like numbers that I've heard B2B brands throw around. And like, to me, that just feels like that's exhausting. Like you just can't have that many relationships that are quality relationships. For the most part, but I especially I think if you're starting out. And so I think making sure that you have a few foundational people that you have built strong relationships with, and then you can start to build it out. But, like as with anything, as with any marketing program, really thinking small first before you just before you go big and blow it out. Like that to me feels like it's a much more solid foundation for any kind of influencer program.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for starting with quality, right? Because everything else will be founded on or based on it. Basically the last question I have for you, who are some of your favorite influencers, that operate in the B2B world in some way, whether it's marketing or tech or somewhere else?
Yeah, Avinash Kaushik at Google. I don't even know if he would consider himself an influencer, but he is, I think. Mostly because his brain functions so differently than mine does. And so I always love I'm on his newsletter list. I love to read his perspective and his point of view, and follow him on social, for the same reasons. Chris Penn is somebody else who, again, very different approach, but like, if you took Chris Penn's brain, and I think you took my brain and you sort of put them together, like you'd get like this, a whole body marketer. It's like, I think I come at it very much from the art, high touch, and he comes at it very much from the science and analytics standpoint. And so I appreciate his message so much because he helps me elevate, what I do just by paying attention to what he's doing. So yeah, those are two that come to mind. Who else? I love what April Dunford talks about around positioning. I think she offers some really valuable advice, and I always love seeing what she has to say, and yeah, just hearing her point of view on things. I don't know, you certainly, like, I think and I know it's like your show, so I probably shouldn't tell you, but like just the work you've done around influencer marketing, I think you absolutely are helping to push the industry forward, in terms of like how to do it right, and how to create programs that actually do sustain themselves long term and deliver value for your organization. So yeah, let me think about this a little bit more. But yeah, that's immediately.
Well, I appreciate that. It's because I get to learn from people like yourself, and that's my job, is to learn, right? Learn, analyze, process, and try to create value back. So I'm very appreciative of everything you've done to contribute to elevate the practice of marketing. Content marketing, especially, has been immensely valuable. Really, for me, and one of the most important lessons I've learned from you is, you didn't say this, but it was basically, don't be so loquacious. Just be succinct, dude. I think I sent you something, and I think your reply was, does it really have to be this long? Or something like that. I was like, awesome. And it literally changed. I changed so much just because of feedback like that. Anyway, you've been very influential to me. So thank you so much for sharing your insights, Anne. I really appreciate it. You are a gold mine and wealth of information, and you're a wonderful human being. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.